Back to GearWire.com. Once again, I'm looking at the TR-707, but this time I'm using the EXS-24 in Logic. I've never really touched on the sampler in Logic, so I figured I'd take a look at it and show you how to use this to harness the power of analog to your advantage. Now, not all of us have the money to go out and buy a 909 or an 808. I know I really don't have the money to go out and buy an 808 if I want to, but I'd love to have one. However, my friend Justin happens to have one. We actually went over there a few weeks ago, if you've seen an earlier video. And I want to actually go back and sample that. Now, right now I have a TR-707 that someone lent me. So eventually you're spending all this money on analog gear or analog drum machines when really you don't need to be, and you're sitting on top of it. And if you live in a small apartment in a big city, you don't necessarily have room to be sleeping on all this equipment. So here's a really easy way to make samples without falling prey to the consumer samples that are often shipped with various VST products. One of the big problems I have with VSTs is that they come with these preloaded samples that usually are too clean and too low in their recording volume for what I want. So what I've done here is I've sampled all of my drum sounds from the 707. You'll see here, play it back. I've sampled them all at different volume levels with different accents. Let's get out of the loop here. See, that's my bass kick. Here I've added a little more accent there. Go over here. My snare. Now without the accent. The other snare. And now with accent. And so down the line I've sampled all these. Now for this demo I've sampled the cowbell. The reason being, this is actually, I was reading an interview recently, and Mastercraft actually used that cowbell in the song Easy Love off their first album. So I figured, why not go ahead and try to actually figure out how they made that sound. So what I did was I recorded it pretty hot with the accent on, and I've got this loop here just of the cowbell. Now, I know that's not the key they use. That's not the point. The point is just an exercise in trying to duplicate how you would sample an analog drum machine and use it in an actual track. So if I double-click on here, you'll see I've just got a MIDI file laid out. The way I did this was I went into the mixer window, opened the EXS-24, and so you'll see this is basically a sampler, but it's really way too complicated for what we're doing. This is designed more for handling sampled full pianos and cellos and whatnot. But I've loaded up the sampler instrument here, and I go to the edit window, and you'll notice I've pretty much erased everything that was in here, and I've kept one zone, and I've made it the full range as high as it can go. Loaded my sample in here. See, if I open this, it says cowbell big. I can pre-sample it here. Turn that up a little bit so you can hear it better. So if I get out of here, I'm in my actual sampler window in the EXS-24, and you'll notice the drive's all the way up. I can take that down. Let's play back our loop. So I can overdrive it, hit the fat switch. I can use cutoff, filter the frequency. I can change up the type of filter. And change the key control. I can also make this a band pass instead. Or I can just turn it off. Now I also have available to me a tuning control. And of course all this can be automated. You have randomization control. Kind of just pitch bends however it wants. Fine pitch tuning. If you want your cowbell to be on the same tuning as your keyboard, this is definitely very useful. Here we have also the LFO, which we can assign. We have LFO2, envelope, so you can adjust your attack, decay, sustain, and release. Envelope 1 and 2. So if you want to roll off the attack at all, you can do that. Get out of here real quick. Now one of the keys to sampling an analog drum machine, because in this case we're actually using a non-analog drum machine, I do want to point that out. There's analog circuitry, but all the samples are stored as 8-bit and 6-bit samples, similar to a Nintendo Entertainment System. So what it's doing is it's sending those out. What I want to do is record it as hot as possible. So I turned up the values on each. I maxed out the volume on each of the samples and maxed out the volume on the Roland drum machine, and then I adjusted the input on my Army Fireface so that it's just where it needs to be right before it peaks. That way I get the loudest possible signal for what I want. Now, if you were doing something a little more discreet, you might not want to do that, but the thing is I'm trying to minimize noise so that those kicks really kick and those snares come in and they don't have this trail of noise after them. That's one thing to really look out for with these old machines, because sometimes if the volume's down a little bit low, you get a lot of noise coming through. Again, just an observation I've made from doing this. Real quick, let's play back. I've got a hip-hop loop here using a kit from Logic. This is not a 707 kit. And just play it back to see how it sounds. Now, if I want to make that cowbell fit in there better, I can actually use a reverb. Change up the room size. Change up the pre-delay. Get some crazy effects out of it. One thing that is interesting, though, is these analog drum kits and the 707 drum kit really cut through the mix. I mean, I threw it in there and I have the volume way down and I have the drums, the kick drums and the snare way up and the clap way up. And that thing just cuts right through. So again, one of the advantages of making your own samples and just doing it DIY style, not necessarily going out and buying a sample pack, but really getting the real thing in your hands, sampling it how you want it for how you're producing. Well, that's a pretty simple way to use the sampler, the EXS-24 in Logic, with a old school drum machine. My name is Bill Holland, and you're watching GearWire.com.